Hi, Bob. Welcome back to discuss shortly today. Let's pick up today on the questions from the chat that was put under the video, under the live stream last week that unfortunately we couldn't see during the webinar. So we still want to address those questions and those comments that were made there. And thanks for picking that up with me. And I'd say let's just jump right in. The first question, or the first comment actually was from a customer that says we can always try to upsell green credentials. However, how do you convince the brand, the customer, and ultimately the consumer that the extra cost makes the benefit worthwhile? And that's a question we have addressed a little bit already in the webinar with that cost point that we discussed about. Could you elaborate maybe a bit further?
Yeah, I think if you remember, we said, there's a reason that unsustainable products might be cheaper. And, in the short, long term, if you're not then able to access market, or attract investors, then there's a cost implication there as well. But the point is that some sustainable products might be more expensive, but many are actually cost competitive. The fact is that when they're cost competitive and you have the sustainability benefit added to it, then why wouldn't you choose those? And Rafnex Plus is a great example of that, where it's if you think about the productivity and the sustainability added value that comes with that product, then absolutely it's cost competitive. And that's a great example of that. There will be other products, the more, let's say the new innovations that come to market, they, in terms of supply and demand, or scaled up production, that might mean that initially they're more expensive, but that's also a reality. But the fact is that actually many sustainability products today are cost competitive.
Sounds good. Thanks for that added info, Bob. And then moving on to the next question, there was something very concrete. Is your sustainable film available with sustainable adhesive?
Sustainable adhesive, how do you define sustainable adhesive? I think there are many adhesives that we offer today which have a sustainability angle to them. We have wash-off adhesives, we have screenable adhesives, we have removable adhesives. And the idea is that they're then applied to products to enhance recyclability going forward. So somehow we're improving the quality of the recyclate that's coming out of the recycling process. So those already exist. And I mentioned also this renewables question. We're looking at some really interesting innovations coming out where we're replacing fossil-based components and adhesives with bio-based going forward. And I think that's an exciting arena for us to be entering into.
Okay, so that's similar to forest film, where you replace the fossil-based components with bio-based, but that going then into adhesives in the future as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sounds good. And then the next question, also on a bio-based material, is concretely on the rough bio-PE material. What is the future for that rough bio-PE? And as you know, our rough bio-PE is the white or transparent material based on more than 80% sugarcane ethanol.
Rough bio-PE, I think the plan is now to transition that to the forest-based PE material going forward, and therefore, the idea is that having sustainable forestry as the source of a raw material is the key action here. So that's where we're taking rough bio-PE going forward. It'll become forest PE.
Sounds good. So forest PP first, already out now. Forest PE is the next one to come towards the, I heard just yesterday, towards the end of September, early October. So will be available very soon.
Yes.
And then there's a very specific technical question. When you make your life cycle assessment analysis for customers, do you use specific technical data from the production of the analyzed material, or do you use data from the general database?
Our life cycle assessment model is past 2050 verified by the Carbon Trust. And that means that we are committed also to using primary data wherever possible. So the answer is yes, we use specific technical data for operations and processes. If for some reason that primary data is not available, then of course we then revert back to general data which is available, for example, in the GABI databases. So yeah, primary data wherever possible.
Okay, sounds good. And then, of course, there's the regular updating of the model that we actually keep the databases and also the data from production up to date in the system itself.
Yes, regularly updated throughout the year, actually. Yeah.
Sounds good. Then another specific product question: where are you can Raffertag with biodegradable adhesives? And maybe before we jump into the answer concretely, could you maybe clarify first biodegradable versus compostable? Because we see that gets confused a lot.
Yeah, that's a common question, and basically biodegradability means, of course, that you're breaking it down into CO2, water, and the other elements. When you're talking about biodegradability, there is no specific timeline attached, and that could be happening anywhere, including in nature. When we talk about compostability, then you're doing the same breakdown process, but within very specific conditions and with a very specific timeline. And our approach, of course, has been that we are not designing things to throw away. So the idea is that if we will develop compostable products going forward, our idea is that they will be designed, for example, for industrial composting, where you have very clear conditions, very clear timelines, and then you can also test and verify that compostability to the different standards that are out there. So that's the approach that we will be taking going forward.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that's an important part as well, that we get an inquiries, the home composting versus industrial composting. It's important not to confuse those, because standards have different testing methods for these as well. And most materials, most products typically get industrially composted, or the testing happens for industrial composting. Yes. And in terms of our own roadmap, we are currently developing a new compostable material that hopefully will be available next year. And stay tuned for that. But of course, also we are there to support you with guidance on compostability, because not for every application it makes sense to actually use a compostable material. And we're there to guide you through with that. So please come back to us with a question that you might have on that.
Yeah, and I repeat, our aim is not to design things to throw away. Our whole ethos is to design materials that stay in the circular economy, keep that valuable raw material moving around.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a good point. Moving to the next question, keeping valuable material moving around, because we have here from two people the same question regarding our wooden plastic, which I assume is our forest film. So what's the impact of those labels on the recycling process? Don't they detriment the recycling process?
Not at all. Forest film basically can be recycled exactly the same way that standard fossil-based PE and PE film labels can be. So, the point is that chemically they're the same polymer. It's just that the origin of that raw material is no longer fossil-based, but it's actually a sustainably managed forest, and that's the difference. But from a recyclability perspective, no difference in performance at all.
Okay, very good. So it doesn't go to the detriment, but it rather stays the same from the recycling system and can be used exactly in the same way.
Yeah, indeed. And hey, talking about recyclability, I don't know, Vera, if you remember, but we showed this package here with a paper label on a plastic pouch, and a couple of people commented afterwards that, hey, that's not, well, from a recyclability point of view, that raises questions. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on how we tackle that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to do that. Thanks for bringing that up. It's true that recyclability is something you have to really consider very carefully when you talk about a label and the type of packaging it is actually put on. So in this case, what you are holding up there, Bob, that's a flexible packaging pouch that is made out of a multi-material. So it's a PP and PET combination as flexible packaging, which in itself, the packaging is already considered non-recyclable due to the two different resins being used there. So in that sense, if you use the lowest footprint material for labeling, that's actually a good thing, because you lower the footprint, the environmental footprint. But of course, the end user should also work towards improving that pouch and make it into a monomaterial pouch to make sure that it can go into a regular recycling stream. So if it were a monomaterial pouch, then the question becomes, can I put a paper on a plastic or not? And while it is actually, it's easy to just ask, we want to have the same material always on the same packaging, it's good to understand what the impact of that is. And We can't go into all the details today here, so I'll leave you with 2 short points. There's the consideration that if you put paper on plastic, many guidelines already ask you not to do that today. But when it comes to the reality of, for example, PP and PE recycling today, most materials or the recyclate is actually being downcycled and is used for lower grade plastics in the next step. For example, lawn chairs, bucket, fences. And the demand for such recycled plastics is extremely high. So there isn't even a demand issue. So if the plastics gets recycled into other materials, then there still is a lack of demand, a lack of supply to another part of the industry that uses that recyclate. So we have to be really careful of the impacts of what we choose where to do. We see this, though, definitely developing exactly that direction going forward, but it's definitely a few more years, probably a decade before that will come into full effect. But if you're interested in these types of questions regarding recyclability, we'll be very happy to educate further in one-on-one discussions, but also with our circular economy webinar that we bring up in November, where we'll discuss exactly about those topics. So we'd say stay tuned for that. And at least from my side, there wasn't any other questions that came up in the comments. If nothing else from you, thanks so much again, Bob, today. And I'd say let's move on and hopefully see you all in November for the Circular Economy webinar.
Have a good sustainability day, everybody.